Okay, it is 6:30, so I will call the meeting to order. Is there a motion?
Do you want to do roll call?
Oh yeah, we'll do roll call, sorry. Alicia, will you go ahead and start with roll call?
Yep. Lori Belargin.
Here.
Ian McDonald.
Here.
Matt Foucault.
Here.
Lacey Oster.
Here.
Bruce Belargin. Cherie Link. Marge Below.
Here.
Okay, our district mission: together we engage, educate, and empower all learners, bridging their passions to pathways to create successful futures and positively contribute to our local and global communities. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for tonight?
So move.
Is there a second?
Sorry.
Any discussion to follow? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I did not receive any requests for public comment, nor are there any red cards, so we'll keep moving for that. So we'll go to our introduction of our student resource officer.
Fantastic. Hi, Officer Kerber.
Hello.
I'm gonna have you stand up to the podium here. Welcome. So this is Jared Kerber. He will be our SRO for the school district for the 22-23 school year. So we're excited to have him. He started kind of getting his feet wet into the position last year, second semester or so. So it's nice to have him familiar with our buildings, familiar with some students, kind of how we operate in the district, which will be awesome. So we thought it'd be great to get him in front of the board and the community so people can kind of put a name with a face of who's going to be in our district. So welcome, Jared. Any words of wisdom that you have for your position and getting the year started?
I'm excited for the opportunity. I got to, like you mentioned, get my feet wet, and I'm looking forward to the start of the school year.
Any questions for Officer Kerber?
A couple.
Great.
So you work out of the high school, correct? Primarily?
Correct. Yeah.
Office-wise? And then you plan to be on campus from start of the day to end?
7:30 to 3:30.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
In a marked car?
Yes.
Marked patrol car?
I mean, there may be a day or two that I have to use one of our unmarked squad cars. Coming November-ish, I don't know if you've heard or not, we're getting a Tesla Model Y, so that'll be a cool squad car that I can bring around to all three schools and be able to interact with students that way too. I think that'll have a positive impact hopefully. So.
Yeah. And then just, after the Texas incident, some of us on the board got some emails about presence. So I guess just on behalf of those community members that spoke, any presence, at drop-off time, at pickup, I think would be a welcome, sense of security for parents. So.
Okay. And then I can pass things like that along to the other officers. And I know last year we tried to do as best we could after school traffic, and we can make that a focal point this year as well.
Fantastic. Welcome.
Yes, welcome.
And I think because of some of those concerns, which is why we kind of shifted the contract hours a little bit to make sure that obviously that Officer Kerber was here early and before and after school to help mitigate some of that stuff too.
And all of our officers after, I think, tomorrow and Thursday will have gone to alert. It's an active shooter training. I myself have been to that as well. So.
Good.
I think too, so it's important to know Officer Kerber will work closely with Abby Bohada, our Director of People Services, who's in charge of emergency management, and just going through all of our school safety things there. So they'll have a close partnership too. Abby's created kind of a nice document for monthly, I guess I would say training that'll be happening, age specific and appropriate in each building to kind of go through, all things school safety, which, we wish we didn't have to talk about, but unfortunately we need to make sure that we're safe and prepared, so he'll be a big part of that as well.
Excellent.
Anything else for Officer Kerber? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming. You're welcome to stay as long as you would like, or if you have police things to do.
I'm on overtime right now. So
Oh, so you're going to
So
be
have
here
a
all
seat,
night.
feel
Yeah.
I'm sure Joe will be happy if I take off right
Yeah.
now. So, nice to meet you guys though.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Trent, you're up next with the athletics overnight trips.
Yes, absolutely. So this is an annual item that we bring forward to the board. Anytime we have overnight trips that are coming down the pipe for athletics for the school year, we get these out there to have approval. Teams that qualify for state, that's not something that has to get brought forward for approval. These are just regular season type events. So again, this is an annual thing that we bring forward. I want to point out, I did make a mistake on my memo. We are not going to have our softball team travel from April 14th through May 15th, Shawano. Shawano is a beautiful place in Wisconsin, but we're not going to send them for a month over there to play 2 games. So I'll have that corrected on the memo for the next round when that comes back later this month. These are all regular season contests, and then the teams are responsible for their hotel accommodations and additional expenses that go along with that.
So is that May 14th to May 15th?
It should be April 14th through April 15th.
Ah, okay.
Any other questions for Trent? Easy enough, thank you. Okay, Abby, you're up for our speech and language aid, and you got the next couple pieces.
Yeah. So trying to think differently about finding some staffing. We've had a part-time OT and part-time speech and language person position posted, and have 0 applicants for both of them. So looking at things differently, so you can see the 2 memos. The first one I can talk about is the increase of the certified occupational therapist. We already have one of those in our district, she's 0.5. We have 1 OT left in our district, and that person is 0.8. Been working closely with her and over the summer and having lots of conversations. If we increase their quota time, we'd be able to, our assistant can provide all the services to students with a licensed OT overseeing those services. The licensed OT does the IEP, work with, and the progress reports. The assistant helps deliver the services, very common model in a lot of districts. So my recommendation is that we actually increase our quota time to 0.9 and then keep our OT at 0.8. It's still financially less than if we were to fill the 2 days of an OT time, and we're able to service a lot more students because she would be there for 4.5 days versus 2 days. So if you're all right, I'd like to give that model a try. I think we'll be able to reach a lot of students that way and still be compliant for our IEPs. And then if you look at our speech and language, we also had a 0.4 posted for that and have had 0 applicants. And so I'd like to kind of shift and start using a similar model. There are speech and language pathologist assistants. It's recommended that they have a bachelor's degree in language disorders already, and these are people who just never went on to get their speech and language license. And that would, similar kind of idea. They would be able to help deliver services for speech and language with our 2 speech and language therapists that we have in district overseeing all of that. Again, it's a financial savings because having them bringing them an assistant on would be cheaper than trying to find a SLP overall. So if you're okay with those, that's a new position that we would be posting for, that one. I don't know if I just need an approval, I'm not sure, but I wanted to bring it to your attention that we're trying what we can here to make sure we're compliant and giving good quality services to our students.
With other districts with the SLP assistants, are those getting filled more readily than SLP? Like, are you pretty confident that?
In previous years, they have been. A lot of directors have talked about that a lot. I'm not sure about this summer if they have been. I look, there are a couple still posted, but I'm hopeful that maybe, we'll have somebody even in our community that might have this, bachelor's. I have reached out to both Eau Claire and River Falls universities who have that bachelor's program to say, hey, we're here now, we're ready to be at the table. Would love to have if you have any students that would like to come and join our district. So it's worth we got 0 on the therapist, so I guess we'll see what we can get for an assistant.
So do you need a motion so you can do that tomorrow?
That would be great. Yes, please.
I don't think this is listed on our agenda as an action item.
I'm not sure what you mean.
It's not, that's what I was asking, can we make a motion on it? Doesn't say possible action.
We have a meeting next week, at least we wouldn't have to wait until the regular session. We could add it to that one.
But if a motion is made, can we make one?
I don't think there's a law against it, but I can't tell you that for sure.
So the motion would need to raise it as, say it one more time, would you?
Yep, it would be two different things. The OT assistant would have an increase in her hours to .9, and then we would be able to post for a SLP assistant, which is a new position. And that would be at a .8.
I'm just thinking it's August 8th and
Yeah.
school is starting
Right.
soon, so
I will make a motion for what you just described. I don't know if I can say it back to you, but if you want to read that off again, just to make sure that I'm tracking with you.
Motion to post for an SLP assistant at .8, which is a new position, and then increase our OT assistant's time from .2 to .9, 0.25 to .9.
is that correct?
Yes.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Discussion for this. Okay, if there's no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, thank you.
Yep. Okay, then moving on to the policy update. The first reading of the bylaws and policies. Did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I can try to talk to this, Ian, maybe you can help me. When we met with, I'm drawing a blank on his name from Neola. Chris, when we met with Chris, he had some questions on the first and second readings that we do with our policies. He had presented that many districts have evolved to one reading, the first reading being that with the board or the policy committee, the second reading being at the regular meeting, so that the policies aren't falling out of work session and then on the 2 weeks later on the regular meeting. So he presented some updates if we wanted to explore that. If the board feels like you want to see them 2 times, I think that's fine. But he just said for ease of an agenda, we could use the policy committee as the first reading, bring it to the board, obviously present it to the board on the agenda, you have a chance to look at it, and then we would discuss it at the regular meeting. Did I say that, Ian, right?
Yeah.
So it's here, we as a policy committee, we haven't really discussed or changed this. So it's on our agenda tonight. Obviously, this would be a first reading. If there's someone that's strongly in favor of one way or the other, I think this would be a good opportunity to talk about it. And then we can decide to bring it back to the next meeting, or if we want to just leave it as is, we don't need to change this at all.
So we currently have this policy, and it is written with all of these taken, so that we have a first reading at the work session, and that both readings come before the board. So I prefer keeping it the way we have it now. All of these options that are in this policy attached to the agenda are what we currently have. And the reason I think it works best is, you know, I was on the policy committee for 2 years, and when in the past, the policy committee did not want to be in a position where the entire board did not have input. And so when you bring it to the work session for the first reading, everybody can see it, and there can be full board discussion of the options that are available.
Okay. I think that's completely fair if we're all on the same page. I don't think it takes a lot of time at that work session at the second meeting, so I'm okay leaving it just as it is.
It can just get redundant. Like, if there's no changes, I see, because he said as when you guys did meet with them too, you said it's kind of rare. The more common practice that boards are doing is you have your policy committee, that's first reading, and then you bring it, that would be second.
Right. So, Lori, leave it as is for now?
Well, that would be my
Yep,
preference.
okay.
Ian, did you have thoughts after meeting or with Chris
Well, I
as
mean,
well?
that makes sense. The only thing is there, trying to get over the redundancy, is there a way to have the policy read if there were any changes?
Mhm.
Because she's right, then they have a chance to look at it at the work session. But a lot of them are gonna be just, yes, we read it, compliant with regulations.
Well, and there have been times too, with what Lori's saying, like, if during the working session, something's brought up and the public is watching or here, that they have concerns on that policy before we approve it, so it gives that piece of time to, for feedback outside of the board. Any other discussion with that? Okay.
Marge, you got anything? You were on the policy committee. Any thoughts?
Same as Lori. Keep it. Keep it. Okay.
So, Alicia, can we just make sure that we make sure it reads the exact same when it comes back then?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay, so we were going to do school perceptions, but it's not quite 7:15. So if we can move ahead to your superintendent
Sure.
update, Shannon, that would be wonderful.
You bet. I'm gonna jump around a little bit in my order here, but I'll start with 11D. So just wanted to report back, I attended the new superintendent academy last week in Stevens Point with about 40 other new superintendents in the state. It was fantastic. Every session was relevant and obviously really good learning for new superintendents, great networking, just kind of finding out what's happening in other districts and even how boards are set up, to policy, to legal considerations, to school finance. Certainly time well spent. And so we will get back together face to face with that group 2 more times this year. And otherwise we have at least once or twice a month, an hour-and-a-half Zoom video that we all jump on, and every time is a different topic where we kind of just weigh in on how are things going and what support do you need and hot topics that come up. So that was, like I said, really, really good way just to kind of get my feet wet a little bit and connect with other people who are kind of navigating this journey of new superintendency, which was really great. So 11B, Dave and Jody and I met with Victoria. So that was exciting. We met with her for about an hour last week and she was able to give us some really good data. We were able to give her some information that she was looking for in terms of, she had some questions on some specific positions we have in the district so she can better align them with kind of where she was placing people on the salary schedule based off of roles, responsibilities, if they supervise people, those kinds of things to kind of make sure they're in the right spot. So she came back with data that was really heavy on support staff, supervisory support staff, and then a couple other specific positions that we asked about, like school nurse, for example. And our high school assistant principal AD as well, just to try to get an idea of kind of where that lands in the area. She had a little bit of a hard time gathering information specifically on teachers. So we asked her to go back and reach out to districts one more time to see if she could get copies of current blank teacher contracts from area districts. We also asked her to go back and see if she could gather up some data from area schools regarding incentives that districts are now looking at in terms of putting in to teacher contracts, support staff contracts, again, kind of in the name of retention and trying to recruit really good people to our district. So Dave and Jody and I are meeting again this week to kind of filter through some additional information that she asked us to look at with the initial data that she gave us. Planning on touching base with her again in about a week or so. And probably in September was our best guess. We'd be able to bring something to you in a more formal manner of, here's kind of the official data that she gave, and then we can kind of have some discussions of, do we want to act on this? What does that look like from the budget standpoint? Those kinds of things. So we were happy to be able to finally connect with her, which was awesome. But a little bit more back and forth has to happen before we feel like we're in a good spot to kind of bring something formally to the board to kind of take a look at for discussion. Any questions on that?
How much money have we spent on that study so far?
So I just talked to Dave about this before we came in. So my understanding is that it's around 10,000 for the job. So, you know, he and I were just talking about this because I know Osceola, although I don't know the name of the company, they're using a different district and spending about 3 times more. So the price point seems to be good, but obviously we've had some frustration of, you know, responsiveness and those kinds of things. So we were thankful that she was able to give us a lot of really good information last week because we frankly weren't sure kind of where that was going to land at all. So I don't know exactly like a number that we spent right now, but total, all said and done, I think that was the agreement. Whether that stands based off of, again, you know, what she's been kind of MIA for a couple months, I guess maybe stay tuned. So.
So your recommendation would be let her respond back with the data that you asked.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a date.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, not this coming week, but next week, I believe.
Okay, so by the end of the month, we know whether we just terminate the contract or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So let's talk about COVID for just a second. So, you know, with school obviously looming here very quickly, wanted to just kind of bring to the table here administratively the recommendations we have in terms of responding to COVID, which frankly are not going to look any different at this point than how we ended the school year. You know, fall sports have started, so we wanted to make sure that we had this conversation not only as an admin team, but certainly brought it here for your awareness. You know, looking at if a student or staff member tests positive, staying home for 5 days, which again is how we ended the school year, returning after those 5 days symptom-free, no mask requirement, and then continuing with the no contact tracing, no household quarantines. If students or staff come to school with symptoms, you know, we'll kind of screen it like we always have in terms of we want people to stay home if they're not feeling well. We want people to kind of do that self-monitoring if we've got a sore throat or a runny nose, you know, making that decision before coming to school. And then simply asking people to return when symptom-free. So I have not received anything specific from our county health, or I have not personally seen any updated recommendations from the CDC. So at this point, I'm just going off of how we ended the school year. You know, not requiring people to test, any of those kinds of things, but just kind of monitoring things as we get back to school. You know, right now we've got lots of kids, you know, coming together, as I mentioned, with fall sports happening. And once we get everyone back into the building, just like we, you know, again, kind of ended the school year, just monitoring our numbers and where we're at, and then making any changes if we need to at that point. But in connecting with the middle border superintendents as well, all of them have almost an identical plan. You know, no one at this point is making any drastic changes, and really just kind of wanting to monitor and see how things go once we get everybody back into the building. So, questions on that?
You said if they test positive,
Mhm.
but testing is not required.
Correct.
So if they're having
be-
symptoms of COVID and they go home with a stuffy nose, they don't have to take the test to.
Correct. We'd like them to return when symptom-free. So basically, we're relying on self-reporting if somebody chooses to test. Mhm. Questions on that? Okay. Okay. 2 more things left here. Alicia, if you want to pull up that document, I'm just going to pop up here quick. So just want to give you a little update on kind of now that I'm through the first 30-ish days or so, frankly, kind of what have I been doing? So I'm going to focus your attention really to kind of the orange part here. These 2 columns are still what I would consider a working document, so I will come back around the end of August and around the end of September and update you on these things as well. But just kind of want to walk through a little bit of kind of what's been happening in the world of superintendency, right? So lots of discussion about staffing. Obviously, Abby's a great example coming up here today, and we're trying to be as creative as possible. We have a few more positions that we need to fill, but by and large, we're looking really, really good, especially in comparison to some of the districts around us. I just got an email again yesterday from an area district saying, do you know a social studies teacher? Do you know an English teacher? So knock on wood, we're sitting pretty good at this point. We've talked about scheduling a board retreat, and so that's going to be in the works, which I'm excited about. Scheduling weekly meetings with the business manager. Dave and I laughed about this because right now we're meeting about 3 times a day with referendum, and just, we had the auditor here last week, so just lots of things happening right now as we talk more about budget and waiting to get information from the state, so lots of things happening there. You just heard me give an overview of kind of the status of our wage study with McGrath, so more information coming. Scheduling weekly meetings with the board president, so Lacey and I have been able to meet weekly, which has been really, really good. Lots of collaboration regarding what's happening on the agenda, giving her kind of a preview of things that I'm going to be talking about at the meetings, being able to kind of work back and forth of any questions that she has, so that's been really helpful for me and hopefully for you as well, but that's been great. Collaborating with board regarding next steps for upcoming referendum, So we've created the website, which we had sent information out about. I have met with school perceptions. Obviously, they'll be here later tonight. I've had 2 conversations with Vaughn, hi Vaughn, from Wold, which has been great. Dave and I have met with PMA, which has really been some in-depth conversations about what happens with all kinds of financing options when it comes to the referendum. So that has been some really good work to help get ready for supporting a referendum. I'll kind of combine these 2, but I've had individual meetings with each member of the admin team as well as each member of the district office staff. As my role has transitioned, the dynamic of that team and my relationships with those team members now looks a little bit different. So we've had some good conversations of just kind of where each of them is at right now, looking at goals, looking at strengths, looking at areas of focus for the year, what they need from me, what I need from them. And then, as I mentioned, meeting with the district office staff, because my relationship with them is now looking a little bit different as well. So just kind of finding out the ins and outs of this building and the culture of this building, and being able to support them as well. I've attended the new superintendent's meeting at CISA, which was 2 weeks ago, which I reported on. Create and send weekly communication to the board, which I'm hoping that you're finding helpful. If there's ever some information that you're like, man, Shannon, it'd be really nice if we got this, certainly feel free to send me an email and give me some feedback if there's some other things you might find helpful. But hopefully this will be able to give you some good insight, not only updates from me, but certainly kind of, as I mentioned, bringing the buildings alive a little bit and seeing some celebrations and things that we're really proud of that are happening in the district. I've had 2 meetings with JA Counter just for some onboarding regarding our healthcare and some other financial pieces of the district. I've met with the village for an update on growth and overall the development that potentially could impact the school district. And as I just mentioned, attending the first year superintendent academy through WASDA. So these are just, again, big picture things. Certainly didn't want to take you through, day to day, but just to kind of give you an idea of here's kind of been the first 30 days in a nutshell. As we kind of move to the next 30, which we're already into, obviously, you'll see kind of really starting to dive into a little bit deeper regarding professional development, looking at student achievement data, developing goals for the building, looking at an improvement plan for the district. So starting to dig a little bit deeper into the work to be able to figure out how do we keep, again, celebrating the great things that are happening and looking at some ways that we need to improve and how do we kind of keep moving there. So as I mentioned, I will come back around the end of August or so and give you kind of an update on column 2 here to kind of let you know what's been happening in the first 60 days. So any questions on anything I have here? All right, and I have one more thing for you. So wanted to kind of bring to the table for discussion really a topic that administratively we've been talking about for probably over a year, and really trying to find some ways that we can be really intentional about retaining the really good staff that we have and also making Somerset a really marketable place for incoming staff as well. And one place we'd like to look at is kind of looking at how we have our sick days classified and if we can potentially make some shifts to PTO or paid time off, right? Personal days, however you want to kind of look at it. So the reason we started talking about this is because, when we talk about education kind of as a as a system and as a whole, really kind of out of the pandemic, people are looking at organizations differently. And how do we think differently about showing our staff the value, showing our staff that we're, treating teachers and educators as professionals and all those kinds of things. And this topic comes up a lot because it would be awesome if every wedding, vacation, or non-sick day happened for educators either during spring break or during mid-June to mid-August. And unfortunately, that is not always the case. Life happens even for educators 12 months out of the year. So what I'm proposing, again, for at least discussion tonight is thinking about, so looking at teachers, support staff, and supervisory support staff, so not administrators, but July 1, everybody just got 12 days of sick time. And really thinking about if we could convert even a handful of those days from sick time to PTO, to provide a little bit more flexibility for staff to be able to accommodate if things come up during the year where it doesn't fit into a sick day and they wouldn't necessarily have to have paid time off. So I've done some research in terms of what are other districts doing? Is this in the norm, out of the norm? So Ellsworth and Glenwood City have already moved to this model. I spoke to multiple superintendents that are kind of on the other side of the state that may not be super relevant here, but where people are having this conversation right now a lot, because in terms of, again, valuing how you keep people and making bits and pieces of our contracts look incentivizing, like this is something that we believe is maybe not a massive olive branch, but at least something to be able to show our staff, like, we hear you, we want to provide you some greater flexibility with your time off that sometimes has to happen during the school year. And how do we make that look to be able to still, kind of sustain our system, knowing that subs are still, I'm sure, going to be at a shortage this year, and how do we kind of balance that? So as an admin team, we've had a lot of discussion of, do we want to recommend that we convert all 12 days to PTO? Do we want to maybe take a smaller step and move to 5 days of PTO and the rest of those days being sick days? And then if staff don't use those days, they bank into sick time, just like they always have. The sick days that people have now, nobody loses anything. This is a 100% gain. So, we were a little bit all over the board of like, oh, what makes the most sense? And we don't want to swing the pendulum too far. And knowing that we're going to want to monitor this a little bit, especially for the first couple months, just to kind of see the impact on the system in terms of subs and those kinds of things. And then also likely having to put in what I would consider some structure. Meaning when we have professional development days, those would likely be what we would call blackout days where people would not be able to use PTO because we can't have 30 staff gone on a professional development day. Often other days that come up are the days before spring break, after spring break, the days before Thanksgiving, after Thanksgiving, those kinds of things. And potentially maintaining similar structures like we have right now of potentially only so many out with PTO per building on what I would consider, highly utilized days off for staff. So my intent tonight is not necessarily to present you with every detail of the ins and outs, but basically was to get a feel from you as a board of, is this something you would support? Having a discussion about it, what are some of the pros and cons? And then listening to kind of where you are as a board, and then bringing you a more formal recommendation with, handbook language and those kinds of things to the meeting on the 25th. Is that the next one? Right? Not the 15th, but the next one.
22nd.
Thank you. So I'll push pause and just kind of get your initial thoughts of, what do you think?
So right now they get 12 sick days.
Mm-hmm.
Do they get any PTO?
Mm-hmm.
What do they get PTO?
So either a day or two, depending on what you've been able to bank.
And that's for the school year,
Mhm.
for the contract.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how do they bank that PTO?
Well, if you don't use it the 1 year, then you get 2, but you can't carry over more than that.
So you get 1 day per year? Say that one. So do you get 1 day?
What were you gonna say?
2.
You get 2.
Depending on how many years you've been here and what your position is.
Right.
However, if you do not I'm not sure about all the classes of
Mhm.
employees, but for certified staff, if they do not use their personal days, they can be banked for, depending on when you were hired, because we changed our retirement language in 2006. But for those who were
Right.
hired before 2006, those personal days can be banked for dollars that can be exchanged only to help pay for health insurance after they've retired. But for those who were hired after 2006, that there is no banking.
So if a staff gets 2 days and they don't use them,
Right,
does it turn into 4 next year?
Those days also
No.
come out of their sick days. So if they don't use them, they get banked as sick days
Right.
until they reach 90.
So they go,
You
so
can't have more than 2 at a time. Right.
2
Depend-
PTO days.
You can
Depending
take a
on
week vacation,
your,
where you take it on pay.
right, right.
So staff, okay, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Staff, new contract year, they get 2 PTO days. They don't use them, they convert to sick days. And then,
Right.
so the next year, then I would get 2 more, those go to sick days, right?
Yeah, you don't get to bank them, so the next year you would have 4.
Not PTO,
Right,
but I get the sick time.
right.
Do you see staff using sick time when they shouldn't, when they're not sick? In lieu of a PTO? I mean, it happens
Well,
everywhere, right? We
yeah.
all get it.
Yeah. Do I think the inflexibility has caused scenarios where that has happened? Yes. Yes. Because there are things that will come up that, that don't fall into sick time and like the vast majority of people want to follow the rules and want to do the right thing, right? And I have probably navigated this situation, I mean, even just in the 30, how many days have I been here? I don't know, 38 days I've been here. I've had at least 4 staff come to me and wanting to, whether it's I've had a wedding, I've had a family trip, I've had, you kind of name it, where they need to be gone more than the 2 days, and, can I use sick time? Well, our handbook right now says you cannot, and it would have to be time unpaid. And so, for a variety of reasons, I mean, I just had a meeting with someone last week that, is a teacher that's been here a long time with lots of sick days that unfortunately, because of the inflexibility that we currently have in our structure, this person would have to take 2 days unpaid, right? So we were trying to find at least a little bit of a middle ground. The 5 days came from, okay, if I'm someone that has a trip or a vacation that is happening outside of spring break, which often is out of, right, teacher control, if that makes sense, right? Weddings, again, you name it, lots of reasons that we'd like to be able to provide greater flexibility for that to happen. We were, as an admin team, again, having a lot of discussion of like, well, we could go the full 12, and what would that look like, and what are the pros and cons of that, and, is it too much one way, is it, so if we were gonna err on any side, we would likely want to err on the side of, let's at least convert a couple of those days to provide some greater flexibility. And then monitor and see how it goes. So, this would be, as I said, no one's losing anything they've already banked. This is, if there are some people that have some things in their contracts from previous, we're not touching any of that. This is kind of starting new for this school year. This is something we'd like to try.
Is there, if somebody has PTO time on the books and they leave, are they paid out for that time?
No.
They lose it?
Mhm.
So if they had 2 days or they had 5 days and they left mid-contract year, there's
Right.
no financial
Right.
difference? Is there any financial issue with having PTO on the books as opposed to sick time?
So we don't believe so, in terms of, could there be an increase in teachers, potentially being gone more days than they would if there was, a couple of those days being sick? Maybe, but, in talking to Dave, he financially didn't have a concern. Our bigger concern is just looking at from a trust, a morale, hey, as professionals, we trust you and would like to provide you a little bit more flexibility, knowing that life happens for educators all throughout the school year. And how do we help alleviate some of that? Because we've had to have some really tough conversations with denying people being able to attend things that we'd like to be able, will we get rid of that 100%? Probably not, but we'd like to be able to at least start dipping our toe into what would that look and feel like if we increase that at the very least by a couple days and just see.
I support it.
As a teacher myself, and my kids are in another district, we've often come across like, oh, my spring break's different than theirs, and our district actually just switched this, and I will say it almost helped with the sub shortage, because instead of like, oh, okay, I'm gonna take a sick day to try to, I mean, you can plan a little bit better, and I think as you're saying, you know, just with the morale of our teachers, I think by adding this, it's not anything financially that's gonna change anything. I mean, there's very few jobs in our work world that only has sick time and 1 or 2 PTO days. I mean, I think most jobs, that's kind of unheard of. I would support it. I think just more discussion on, you know, like in front of spring break, after spring break,
Yep.
Christmas. I mean,
Yep.
I don't know necessarily that that's a blackout date, because that's really about making sure that there's a certain amount of staff, so it's
Yep.
not, you know, like all those stipulations that go through that, but I would support for surely, when you said like a handful, I think 5, for some reason that number just sticks out to me, because that like is a week. Not that I think a lot of people would use that full week, but I think it just gives some of that flexibility without, these days are days that teachers would get either way, it's just what they're able to use them on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the antiquated way of thinking is the adage of, right, well, teachers have summers off. Well, you know, that's not relevant or realistic in our opinion as an admin team, in terms of we'd like to be able to provide that flexibility, as I said, and you know, and we know that there are times throughout the year where, you know, teachers being able to take a day to care for themselves is a good thing for our kids in our district. And sure, could they use a sick day for that? Absolutely. But that was also part of our conversation of how do we ensure that we're doing as much as we can proactively to allow people to be able to take care of themselves, not have to feel guilty about it because I took a sick day, but I actually did X, Y, Z because I kind of needed that, right? I mean, so that's kind of our thought process. So.
Other comments, discussion?
So as I mentioned, at the regular session at the end of August, and I will get this to you well ahead of time, but I will give you a more formal memo of what we're recommending for handbook language and just to kind of fine tune some of those pieces, you know, as you said, just some of the rules around what might that look like to make sure it's sustainable in our building, so. Okay.
Look at that.
Perfect.
Okay, so Rob's, is he joining virtually?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. He was presenting at another school district
Oh.
earlier. Mhm.
All right, hello. Oh, of course the speakers are going to the computer, not the smart board. I don't know, anybody great with Zoom on how to?
If you click on the triangle down by mute, next to start video, it should allow you to pick your speakers.
Where is it on? This right here?
Scroll there and then pick your speakers from wherever you're.
Oh,
Speaker, go down
There you go.
I guess I don't know, well, let's try this one. All right, how's that? Let's see.
Yeah, nothing, Somerset,
Yep.
August 8th.
There we
We're in the
You
go.
can start our video too, Alicia.
Thanks,
We're
Ron.
using the start video so they can see it.
Never a shrouded doubt.
It's all the way to the left.
On the bottom.
Great, okay.
Yep, there you go.
Okay.
You can see us.
You can see how much I use Zoom here. I think we're good now.
Okay, and are we up, are we good?
You're good.
Get started, or do you think that you're up yet?
I got it on a smart board. I think we're good to go.
Okay, well, let's launch in then. First with a couple of introductions. I believe I've met most of you before in a virtual boardroom that looks very similar to it does now. But I'm Rob Unice. I serve as the research director for school perceptions and have worked with Mark and now Shannon several times over the last couple of years, both in terms of your staff survey, and there might have been a parent survey somewhere in there. Obviously your community survey, we did your community survey last time as well. So I've been in front of you several times in the past, but Darren and I worked on your project, and I think that Darren might be a newer face for the majority of the board, so I want to give Darren the opportunity to introduce himself as well.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yeah, my name is Darren Sievers. I've been with the school perceptions team for nearly 5 weeks. Prior to that, I was with the Slinger School District for 27 years, the last 9 as superintendent. We are regular users of school perceptions for all of our survey needs and a $43 million referendum back in 2017. And so I got to know Bill very well through a business relationship and had the opportunity to join the team on July 1st. So I'm excited to be part of the meeting tonight, help any way I can.
And Darren has an excellent experience with a referendum in Slinger that had data look very similar to what yours will tonight in Somerset. So at the end, we'll certainly need time for questions, and you can cover us as you see fit. So I'll skip through this slide fairly quickly. You know who we are now. You've worked with school perceptions in the past, but really the point of this slide for districts that have not worked with us before is just to remind people that that this isn't their first rodeo. We've done this many, many times. In fact, we could probably get away with upping 850 to 900 at this point based on the spring and fall that we had last year. But we've done this many times. We've been in business for 20 years, and in those 20 years, we've done 10,000 staff, parent, student, and community surveys, just as you've seen tonight. So our goal for tonight is to cover 4 things. When you see slides that are blue, nothing new will be there. There's no data, no analysis, nothing that was not in the survey already, and we do that on purpose. We, just like before, we want this to be a one-stop shop for you, so that when you are looking back through this, you can see exactly what was in your survey, how you framed things, how you talked about things, and so on. And because of that, we'll go through our blue slides a little bit more quickly, since that will be new information. Our kind of yellowish color is the survey information that's more administration and logistics. Green slides are the results and the analysis. Obviously, we'll be covering those tonight. And then gray slides are where we'll leave time for wrap-up and questions. So a reminder of the process. Households within the district will mail the paper survey, and at that point, respondents could either fill out the paper survey and return it directly to school perceptions in the name of confidentiality. We didn't want you part of that process. Or somebody could take the survey online with heavy emphasis here on one-time use code. Once somebody finished their survey, that code went away, expired. So that nobody was able to take their survey dozens and dozens of times and skew the data in a way that they wanted it to be seen skewed, which is extremely important in a small town, in a small area like Somerset. It wouldn't take too many people trying to do that to sway the results, but they can't because that is one-time use code. So where did that end up? Well, as you know, your survey just finished up a couple of weeks ago, and you had 818 total respondents, which is about 100 more than you had before. So that's good news. Your overall absolute survey number went up. And I believe your participation rate went up as well. You're a quarter of respondents, which is outstanding. That's very good. Whenever Darren and I can type a 2 in front of that number, we get very excited, we get very pleased. We feel confident in our results when we're in the teens. The fact that you were near a quarter just gives extra heft to the fact that we feel very confident in the data that we can provide for you tonight. And the benefits of getting total respondents and that number up is your margin of error is going to decrease. So you're going to get tighter and tighter margin of error, and right now you stand at 3.5%. Here I'm looking at a couple of things. So in the survey we asked respondents for their age, and there are a couple of eyes might go to. places my eyes go to first. First, I expect to see a little bit of a bell curve. I expect to see a hump in the middle, and that is what I'm seeing here as well. And the reason I say that is because a lot of your staff and a lot of your parents are going to be in the middle. This is prime parenting age, and a lot of your staff are going to be captured in those middle bars as well. So I would be concerned if those age groups weren't a little longer, because if staff and parents aren't even engaged in a school survey, then nobody will. But that's not you, so that's good news. And you're 65 plus, that's the other place my eyes go, and you are actually a little overrepresented relative to your community. We did do some homework through the Census Bureau, and your 65 plus comprise 10.2% of your community, but 13% of your survey takers. And that's really good, because your 65 plus, they will be there to vote. They will show up, they have near perfect election attendance, and they are the most likely to be on a fixed income. I have to know what they're thinking, we have to know what they're thinking, and we are capturing that age group. So that's excellent news here. So my two things I'm looking for, you can check off the list. We then asked whether somebody's primary residence is in the school district of Somerset. And this too is a very important question, because we need to filter out people who can't vote there. So the next logical question is, well, why are they getting a survey? And it's a good question. There's no requirement, obviously, for your staff to live within the district's boundaries. They could commute in from elsewhere. Any parent who chooses to open enroll into the district, by definition, doesn't live there, or they wouldn't need to open enroll in. They too have an email address on file, so they're going to get the survey. And if I were to have a second home within the district, but I don't necessarily live there, probably got a mailbox, and so I get the survey that way as well. So what we do here is we want to see who checks no, because we're going to filter them out of many of the desegregations moving forward, and focus on the 90% who said yes, because they are the ones who get to control an election within your district's boundaries. We then asked in which municipality do you live, and I did run this by your admin team a couple of weeks back just to make sure this is kind of what they expected, and it sounds like your town of Somerset covers a great deal geographically of your district, and the village of Somerset proportionally has quite a few people as well, so it sounds like this is kind of what you would expect to see from your district's boundaries. Here we put these pie graphs purposely next to one another. We asked, are you an employee of the district, and do you have children attending a school in the district? So what I want to see here is that staff and parents are taking the survey, but I don't want them to be the only people taking a survey, because they're the most connected, and they are going to skew a little bit closer to support as opposed to opposition. So I want to make sure that non-staff and non-parents are also responding, and that is the case. 16% of respondents said that they are an employee, so 84% are not. And on the right-hand side, 60% are a parent of a school-age kiddo, and 40% are not. And we'll slice and dice this a little bit more as well to pull this data apart. But again, what I want to see here, I am. And then we asked if you have school-age children, what schools do they attend? And it was pretty balanced. And just as a reminder, this doesn't nor should it add up to 100%. Because I could certainly have more than one kid enrolled at the schools at one time, and they may not be at the same school. So I may have an elementary schooler and middle schooler at the same time, so I would check both boxes. And then finally, we asked a preference question. So note the wording here. It does not say, how do you get school information? Because as a community member, I could be communicated with in a way that I don't want to be communicated with. You know, maybe I'm looking at Twitter, but I really want to look at things in the newspaper or something like that. So this question says, how do you like to receive information from us? How do you want to be communicated with? And it's in descending order of your non-parents, non-staff in red. So your non-parents, non-staff, their eyeballs are primarily going to two places, school and district newsletters and the websites. Your parents are a bit more balanced, but you can definitely see some longer bars here comprising emails, the newsletters, the websites, and then phone notifications seem to be valued by your parents as well. You know, no matter what, I tell everybody, admin teams, board members, depending on what you're doing, you're probably going to use all these things anyhow. But it is nice to know, you know, when we send something out there in the ether, is what's our bang for our buck? Is it going to a place where people want to read things or not? Now we're into our blue slide. So just as a reminder, nothing new here. This is exactly what was in your survey. So we noted that you are committed to being good stewards of tax dollars, and your mill rate has declined by over a third recently. We talked a little bit about the work that you had done in the past in 2019 and where you are in these phases right now. And then we asked people to prioritize various projects in your survey. Now, just to kind of sear these definitions into your mind here, because they're going to be important. It was rated on a scale of 3, 2, 1, high, medium, or low. So I, as a survey respondent, could say, yep, a project is high priority for me. This is an address immediately. I could say, no, it's a medium. This is important, but a not right now kind of thing. It's important to me, but I want you to address this in a future project. Or it's low. It's not a priority to me, and I don't want you to address this in the near future. So if you can't go above 3, can't be below 1. And what we've done for you here is we went through each project and we prioritized each one for you. So for instance, your major building systems at the elementary school, we noted the cost, and then we put in by various subgroups what the priority was for this specific project. And while helpful, we wanted to be transparent so you can go back and look at this data. But really, I think the most valuable aspect is a couple of pages in the future, so you can actually put all this data together and say, well, how do these projects stack up against one another then? What do people prioritize the highest, and what do people prioritize the lowest? And just as a reminder, there were 6 projects tested in the survey: the major building systems at the elementary school, stadium improvements, the PAC, the gym addition, parking expansion, and the softball and baseball field relocation. Now here, we put all respondents together. And you're going to see on this particular slicing and dicing of the data that 3 projects are above medium, or in other words, they're above the important and address, in a future project, but kind of a little bit maybe more towards high here, especially your major building systems at the elementary school. That's not surprising. These are very basic things, and if it's something that people are going to do to their house, it's easy to understand because they know that you also have to do it at school. So, those are everything from roofs to plumbing to electrical systems to heating units and boilers, air circulation. Those are the kind of things that definitely fall under the building system updates. And I know you have some elements of those here. That tested quite high at a score of 2.38. And you can see that borne out in the green here as well. 56% of respondents said that they highly prioritize that. The 2 others that were slightly above medium are the stadium improvements at 6 million. That was a priority score at 2.15. And then your PAC had a priority score of 2.07. And then you have 3 projects that fell below medium. So now we're getting into the area where, maybe this is important, but address it in the future, or it's, this is not important and I don't want you to address it right now. So kind of the split between what's above 2 and what's below 2 is kind of what I'm looking at here, and which direction do those numbers go. The 3 that are below 2 are the gym space addition, the parking expansion, and the softball and baseball fields at $2 million, rounding up your data. Now this is one way to look at it. This is pool. The other way to look at it is by asking the same question, and we're looking at the same projects here, but now I've split this apart. So now we're looking specifically at residents. And in your first column here with the numbers, these are all your residents put together. Then we've split this up into 3 categories. Now why do we do that? Well, staff are very influential. They're the ones that get stopped at the grocery store or the post office, and they're the ones that are asked, hey, something's going on at school. I got this survey. Tell me about it. What are you doing? What are they thinking about? Staff also tend to be the most supportive group of the 3 that are here. At the same time, they are the least proportionally represented. About 1% of any given community are staff members. So in a nutshell, very supportive, not that many of them. Parents are kind of in the middle. They represent about 25% of any given community. And your non-parents, non-staff, they are the ones that, by definition, by not having kids right now in the schools and not being employed by you, they're the most disconnected from the school. But they are the highest proportion. They are about 75% of any given community. And what you can see here is that kind of checks out. When we break out these groups, your staff are most supportive, but the top 3 remain the top 3 from the previous slide. That would be your major building system updates, your stadium improvements, and your PAC. Parents look very similar, with one tie here, but the major building systems and the stadium improvements are well above 2, and then at a tie of 2.08 are your PAC and your gym addition. And your non-parents, non-staff, the largest bulk of your community, have 1 score above 2 for your major building system updates. So again, this will show you all respondents. this will show you your residents specifically, based on their category in essence, and how they work or how they're connected to the school. So, well, those are your priorities. Now we need to cross those lines, say, well, that's where that shook out, but we need to find out how much money people are willing to support. Because I can have a lot of projects at my house, and I do, the furnace needs to be replaced eventually, you've got to redo the roof, you want to replace some windows, and all those can't be high priorities to me because money's limited, budgets are limited. So this is where we're asking people, just how much money are you willing to see leave your wallet, assuming the projects that we are pursuing are acceptable to you. And there's two very important numbers here. One is the total cost of various project amounts. And that's the number that somebody's going to see on a ballot. When they walk into a voting booth, this is the number that will be presented to them. So if there is going to be any sticker shock, we want it to be in a survey and not while people are walking into a voting booth. But people really make their decision off of this number right here. How much money is going to leave my wallet? How much is this going to affect me depending on what I want to support? And this is the way that data shook out. So the question read, assuming the projects funded were acceptable to you, what referendum amount would you support? And we begin up at the top with non-parents, non-staff, because they are the largest bulk of your community, again, at about 75%. And the way you read this is by starting from left to right, and you essentially say, well, how low do we need to go before we cross majority threshold support? So the other way to say that is, if Somerset took a $42.6 million referendum to ballot, you would expect to see about 15% of non-parents, non-staff supporting that. So I guess in layman's terms, that isn't going to be supported. The 42.6 is not going to be supported by the community that is well below the 50% threshold. But now we move to the right and we say, well, if that's not going to fly, then what number will? So if I take 15 and add 7, I'm at 22. 14 brings me to 36. 9 brings me to 45. And then I'm well above majority at 58%. So I went down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm in the yellow. So your non-parents, non-staff are saying that they would support a referendum when it's less than $22 million, or at least that's when we cross majority support. Your parents and staff, though, as expected, they're a little bit more connected, so they are more supportive. Your parents actually cross the majority threshold 3 colors down, 1, 2, 3. So if I count down 1, 2, 3, your parents come in with support at around $29 million or so. So the natural question would be, Rob and Derek, what do we do with that? So is it 29? Is it 18? Is it 22? What do we do with that now? How do we put these numbers together? And that's where this slide comes in. So exact same question, same data, but now we've weighted that support based on how common people are in the community. So what I said here is, well, what if the school district of Somerset went for a $22 million referendum? What percentage of people would we expect to support that? So because your parents are 25% of your community, we took 0.25 of their support for $22 million. And then we took 0.75, since your non-parents, non-staff are 3/4 of your community, and multiplied by that, their support of $22 million. So when we weight groups proportionally, we end up at about 52.3%. So that is above 50%. That's above the 50% plus 1 that referendum supporters would need to pass a referendum, but it is within the margin of error. I might categorize that as leaning towards support, but still too close to call. So then I said, well, what if we went low? Cumulative support for a smaller referendum amount. If I follow the same weighting, then we're at 63.8%. So that is well beyond the margin of error, and that is well above 50%. So I guess, the question that I'm beating around the bush for is, what do we want to do moving forward? And a logical question would be, well, what does smaller mean? Smaller than 22 is 1 million, it's 10 million, it's 15 million, it's 21.9 million. All of those are smaller numbers than 22. So I think the difficult conversation for you in this virtual room moving forward is, what projects do we want to take forward, and how much do we want to ask, and basically how bold are we feeling, and how much support will we expect to receive based on various referendum amounts. So kind of putting that together, There is one final piece here that I want to address, but we'll come back to these projects and dollar amounts in just a couple of seconds. But there's a couple of other important pieces of your survey that I want to point out first. So the final bit of your survey was asking people to rate you on 4 metrics on a scale of great to 4. So great was 4, 4 was 1. Can't get better than 4, can't get worse than 1. And those 4 metrics were, how are we doing in terms of keeping the public informed, building pride in the community, delivering a high quality education, and managing funds appropriately. So a couple important things here. One, you are well above the majority on all 4 of these metrics. And that's good news. None of these are below 50%. Or in other words, the majority of your survey respondents are telling you that you're doing good or great on all 4 of these. In terms of the numerical average on the right-hand side, if you look at, if I back up just a second, your middle here would be 2.5 is the exact middle of this data, and you're actually above 2.5 on all of these. So people are leaning towards good, and actually you have a score here, well, a couple of scores that are actually leaning towards very close to good. And so you're above 2.5, which is on the side of the fence that you want to be on. Relatedly, we had a question that said, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend a district to a friend or family member? And you're on the right side of the fence here. You're above neutral. Neutral was 5 on this 0 to 10 scale. And you're at a score of 6.69. One other way that I just out of curiosity, I like to read this data is just starting up at the top and working my way down and see how low I need to get before I reach a majority. So I take the 14% that are giving you a 10, I add in 12, I'm at 26, I add 20, I'm at 46, now I'm pretty close to majority. If I added another 14%, I'm at 60%, I'm well above majority, and I only went down to 7. And, we can say, Darren and I could say confidently over the last couple of weeks, that is not always the case. There are times when we're doing these meetings that sometimes we don't reach majority until 4, 3, or God forbid, sometimes down to a 2, and that's not fun data to present, and it's nights like that. I'm thankful for virtual meetings so I can avoid the tomatoes, and that's good, because that is not you. You're on the right side of the fence here. And the reason we dwell on these a little bit is because these satisfaction metrics are very important. This is kind of a first hurdle to clear for referendum support. And the reason we say that is people that are mad at you don't open up their wallets. If they're deeply unsatisfied, most people are not going to say, yeah, I'm very angry and I'm willing to raise my taxes for you. There's a very small pool of people out there that are willing to say that. So that's why I say this is kind of a first hurdle. If your satisfaction numbers were, or below water and they were in the garbage can, then I might say, well, there's some work to do here before. But that's not you. Again, you based on this slide here and your overall average here, you're in good shape. So, what did we learn? We learned that there is support to pursue a capital referendum. Your survey respondents are saying, yes, go ahead and pursue something. A referendum at $22 million is too close to call and is within the margin of error. And it goes without saying, but we're going to say it anyhow. Support increases as your project's tax impacts and your costs and your scopes decrease. The cheaper something gets, the more support we're going to get. A referendum smaller than $22 million is beyond the margin of error and above 50% respondent support. The 3 projects exceeding medium priority, when we're looking at all respondents, are your building system updates at the elementary school, the stadium improvements, and your PAC. Now, again, backing this up in terms of what have we learned. If you were to do all 3 projects that are listed here, that is well above 22 million. And I think that gets you like, if I remember my numbers right, that's like 25.5 or something like that. 6, and 13 and a half. Well, yeah, so 25.5. So if you were to do all 3, that would not be above majority support. So the question for you moving forward is what projects do we want to tackle? And then the other bit of that is what length of bond do we want to pursue? And I say that because obviously you're very close to tax neutrality back here. You could do a good chunk of work without raising taxes over the current level. So, you could do the top 2 highest priority projects, which is your building system updates and your stadium improvements. And if you shorten the bond, then you might be able to do something without raising taxes over the current level. There's no rule that says you have to do something at a 10-20-year bond. You can always shorten that. Again, not to dwell on the point, but I will. If you try to do all 3, you're going to be beyond what your community is willing to support. Especially if you try to tackle all four of your top priority projects, your gym space addition, now we're looking at upwards of $40 million worth of work, and that just isn't gonna fly. So, you know, in terms of athletics and kind of your fine arts folks as well, you know, you are doing some athletics work here for your stadium improvements, and you're also doing some fine arts work here if you're gonna do the PAC. Because I don't believe as of now you're gonna pursue an operational referendum, you also could do 2 questions, and I think Darren has some expertise here that he can share as well. But remember, you're limited to 2 questions per calendar year. So if and when you decide to pursue something in November, there's no reason why you couldn't do 2 questions, and maybe question 1 is the top 2 highest priority items, the elementary school and the stadium improvements, and maybe you separate the PAC and do that as a 3rd question. So there are some things that you could do here, both in terms of bond amounts, how much you want to tackle, and what you want to do in terms of splitting up these questions, and I think that'll be the most fruitful conversation for the board to think about over the next couple of weeks. Before I shut up, well, I will shut up, and then I'll let Darren give his expertise here, and then we'll turn it over to questions.
Sure, I guess the perspective I could offer you, it came from our 2017 project, and it tested out very similar to what your data shows tonight. We had a base question of about 30 million that would have renovated all 5 buildings. Roofs, chillers, boilers, all that core stuff that the community was very in favor of, 70 to 30. So we knew we could get that 30 million. What tested much softer was our $11.9 million Performing Arts Center that tested at 54.46. And so our strategy, not saying this is what you need to do, because you are your own board, and you as a leadership team will have to decide what best would sell and fly in Somerset. But we did separate the Performing Arts Center from the base question of 30 million and have it be a second question. And then the other strategy we employed was we did ask our architect and builder to sharpen the pencil. We took that $11.9 million Performing Arts Center and got it down to 9.9. Knowing we wanted to strengthen its case for passing, and it ended up passing 55-45. So we gained some percentages there because the price went down. There's something magic about just getting just under that $10 million price tag. So a couple strategies you could employ. You could separate some things out on ballot, so you get those core improvements through for sure, and then some of the other things maybe aren't quite as strong. You could test them separately. Another strategy that we employed, like I said, with the Performing Arts Center, we just really tightened up the budget on that, and maybe there's some things you could lean up to get down to 22, so you could have all 3 of those biggest priority items, but also stay within that budget that seems to have tested nicely. So that's the perspective I have from my time in Slinger when we passed that $43 million.
How can we help?
Questions?
I got a question, I emailed it, and Rob added another slide, so my questions already have been answered. Thank you.
I don't have any questions. This is good information.
I think it was a lot of good information, and I think it was good for the suggestion to give this and then let it all kind of sink in before we kind of go to that next step.
Sure.
I guess this really wasn't in, in the survey, but as far as perspectives, and maybe this is kind of Vaughn too, as far as just things happening in our economy now with, prices on the increase and those pieces. Is there anything that have gone on with other districts, projects that have kind of addressed that? Is it, that's some of the pieces that I've heard.
Let us give you the most unsatisfying answer that you've ever heard, because it's still on both sides of the fence. On the one hand, we work worked for the district who had a referendum failure in the spring of 2021. Yeah, so we're a little over a year now. They went back to the drawing board, and they are getting less done for more money because they waited and inflationary costs were very high, and it never comes down. Once construction costs seem to hit a number, that's just what they are. They only ever go up. They never seem to come down, with the exception of maybe 2008, 2009. But they are on an upward trajectory. So on the one hand, I think focus on the helpful data that your community certainly has an appetite to do something. There's something that they will support, it seems, when it comes to a ballot. And I think that's important because some of these you'll be able to fight off and chew before costs have the potential to further increase. Obviously, interest rates are going up a little bit, which may help your costs as well. Now, how long that takes to trickle down, whether that would happen before November, that's a question mark. But obviously, you're not going to put a shovel in the ground right away. So relatedly, I would say that think in terms of number amount and not in terms of projects. And I don't want that to sound contradictory to what I said before, but really people are really saying that don't go above 22 million. You need to get done what you can for 22 million. So we worked with districts about a year ago that said, well, there's make up a number. There's $30 million worth of support, and that can get us the 3 highest priority projects. Well, by the time April rolled around, those 3 projects that were the highest priority had went up to 40 million. And they said, well, those are the priorities. Now we're going to go for 40 million. And they failed because the price cap was the price cap. People said, we are willing to support 30 million. What those districts should have done is say, okay, they need to think the other way around. They needed to say, okay, the appetite is for 30 million. Now we have to take things off the table to stay under that threshold that people are telling us they're willing to support. So what needs to be manipulated is what you can get done and what projects you're looking to do, and not the dollar amount. The dollar amount is a fairly thick line in the sand for people, especially in the data that I'm seeing here. So I guess my in summary point is you have the appetite, the community has the appetite to do something, and that's good because costs will only increase, and if something were to fail, it's only going to cost more later on down the road. But bear in mind that 22 million and how that plays with priorities.
Thank you.
I argue for both sides, I can't be wrong, so that's the best part of my side.
I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but while you're here, any insight that might be helpful for the board or community?
Well, in terms of construction costs, so while we were in planning in the spring on this, we already knew that inflation was really hitting us hard. So as opposed to districts we were working with on design and actual projects over the last year that were budgeted huge inflation spike. I mean, we always add in inflation, but no one could have anticipated 15, 20% inflation. We've already added in a significant amount of inflation into these numbers, which is what's reflected there. So we shouldn't be in a position unless inflation continues to skyrocket, which we're not seeing, where the inflation isn't covered. A couple of big factors that contractors typically talk about in terms of what are they looking at is gas prices, which we're seeing come down right now, and wage rates for people, which we're not necessarily seeing come down, but we're also not seeing skyrocket at the same point as the construction costs. So we have reason to believe, and based on what we're seeing bid right now, that inflation is at least not continuing on this awkward trajectory that keeps going super high. So there's, we believe that where we have the number set for the scope as defined should be accurate for what we're looking at. So if that helps with the construction pricing, maybe that's the start of that question. I think one question I had for you, Rob, was, was 22 million the option people were given, or was it a range of options? Like, would the answer, if you had said, do you support 24 million, 30 million, would it have come out similar? Those are the amounts, that 22 million. So I'm wondering, like, if it had been asked 24 million was the base as opposed to 22, and then it was the next number up, would you have seen the same support where people said, I'll support your lowest option in that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's actually what I've gotten a couple times over the last couple of weeks. And the answer is, in short, is no. It's actually actually more common that people will gravitate towards some of the middle numbers as opposed to the lowest number. If people are very concerned about the cost, they'll probably tell you no. And there was the option to check on here, yes, I would only support a small referendum, and that actually did garner, remember, the most support from your non-parents, non-staff. So I don't think it came down to what was lowest, because actually people normally gravitate towards the middle. It's never the highest number. It's usually somewhere near the middle, and you did come down towards the bottom. And again, I think people were also looking at these numbers here, and this is really how they make their decision. So I would expect that if we would have went up 24 million and started there, you just would have shaved off a couple percentage points, and you would have had more say, I would only support a small referendum. That data tends to hold up pretty well.
So I guess in terms of the suggestion from Darren of, you know, do you adjust your budgets, do you adjust the scope to land somewhere with some additional education in terms of what's going on? If you could strike that balance somewhere, maybe it's not the 22 million, but it gets to the 24 million to still do the 3 highest priorities with some budget adjustments and scope adjustments. If we can't get down to the 22 million, if you can get closer to the 22 million with the margin of error, is that a possibility?
Well, and you know, that's people want to know that you're listening to them. And I think if you decide to go towards the route of 2 questions, people want to feel like the time they took to give you their data, they want that to be honored, as anyone would. And so I think if you decide to move forward with your 2 highest priority projects, and say, look, we understand that at the very least times are uncertain in terms of what your wages will look like and in terms of what inflation will look like, and we want to give you the option to only do what might make sense, you know, and we're not going to raise your taxes over the current level. That is an option. And then continue to pare down that PAC and then say, you know, financially we've done some really careful planning, so we also want to give you, the voters, the ultimate call, because we know we are close to the margin of error here on a PAC. I think people typically respond well to saying, hey, they did listen. They listened to what we said and they're responding, and 2 questions might be a logical route for you.
And to support Rob's point, and that's a great comment that you made. It isn't as simple as just sharpening a pencil. It is also there's something to be said for the messaging. Tax neutral for us was that $30 to $32 million level. That's why I got so much support. The tax increase was completely the Performing Arts Center, and so by shaving it down, we also took our show on the road that had 7 public listening sessions where we talked about the fact, hey, we asked you the question, seemed like 11.9 was a little bit steep. We pared down the PAC we made it stadium style instead with balcony, talked about the ways we made it more of a lead project, and that seemed to tip the scales for us. But again, we weren't sure, that's why we separated it out. So make a good point. If you lean down the Performing Arts Center, to get in that 23, 24 million, go out and talk it through with the community. So we heard you, and this is what we did in response to your feedback. That's a pretty powerful message to your community from the board and your superintendent.
Any other questions?
And I'll just add this, looking at your chart, not that I'm pushing you for this, but the tax increase you get in that 23, 4, 5 range, that's not big. That's not a big tax increase. So you're right at that tipping point with some work. Maybe that could get done.
I have some questions, and I don't know if you are prepared to answer them tonight. But one of the things that I've been concerned about from the very beginning is you're looking at adding space, but there is nothing in here about operations.
Correct.
It's going to require more costs like electricity and heating and cleaning and maintenance. Our budget for this year is $830,000 in deficit spending, and then you add this space without any operational costs to take care of it and keep it open. Do you, as a builder, have a formula that could estimate for us the cost of operating these spaces?
as an architect, I don't have a formula we use, but there's some fairly common ones I've seen districts start to approach that. One is cost per square foot for your existing utilities, multiply that times the new square footage, and that gives you a pretty good utility cost. Keeping in mind that with performing arts centers, they're not always used at the same rate as the rest of the building. So you might have the lights off and the temperature lower in there at different times during the year, and so it would probably average out. And then it's a question of, from an FTE standpoint, do you feel like your existing custodial staff can manage that, or would you have to bring on an additional 0.5 or whatever it is from an FTE standpoint? From an instructor standpoint, performing arts space isn't necessarily adding more instructors. So,
Right.
So from a staffing standpoint, it's not adding more administrators. And the other projects are existing space. They're maintenance projects at the elementary, and which could actually have a net reduction in some of your operation costs. And the stadium improvements also wouldn't necessarily have a positive or negative impact on operational costs. You'd have synthetic turf versus grass, so you got a minor reduction in mowing, but that's not much. So those two should be maybe a net neutral, as I would look at it. It would really be the additional square foot of the performing arts center that would be the cost.
Right, and I had thought that with turf, you'd be saving some maintenance costs, but I understand there's a lot of maintenance required with turf. For example, cleaning and disinfecting, especially when we're looking at other spreadable diseases that could be spread through artificial turf. So is the cost of artificial turf going to end up being more of a cost, or do you think it?
From what I've heard from most districts, it's kind of a net wash in there. You're trading one maintenance cost for another.
So it's not a savings?
No. With the turf also comes the equipment for raking, cleaning, and doing those other things. So that's already in the assumption cost for purchasing that equipment as the part of the cost of the project, yes.
So when we come back next week and we have more discussion on this and we're gonna have to make a decision, Dave, will you be able to provide the board with the information we need about what it will cost to operate?
Yeah, this question actually came up at our the facilities committee when this was going through, and so Tim asked the cost per square feet, which is for utilities, but like Vaughn said, it may not be as high necessarily as in a fully occupied space. And as far as custodial, I think that he has a wait and see approach, because again, it's not necessarily more, as in a lot of frequency we don't expect, but there's a little bit that we'll have to find out. And when we talked about this, the utility cost and the possibility of custodial increase wasn't enough in itself to say we need an operational question. We're kind of waiting to see, state budget-wise, what happens before we talk about operational question. Because we have, like you said, bigger concerns as well. But back to the school perceptions, I had a question for Rob. Rob, you were zeroing in on the 22 million. Can you hear me?
Dave, you might have to come closer, maybe.
Yeah,
Rob?
whoever was just speaking, I could hear like clear as a bell, but otherwise all I heard was zeroing in on 22 million.
Okay, so this is Dave. When we discussed the survey results preliminarily with the admin team,
Yep.
And you gave us the same rundown, you kind of said you were saying it's 22 million, but really it's the tax impact, it's the 3 cents. And so we did go back to PMA and we said, well, what if we can get something that's close to zero, between 2 and 4 cents? Is there some way to structure this debt that can do that for us? And so they did come back with a couple of approaches that could get us right now the 25.5 million at 4 cents. So is that beyond where you were feeling confident, or is that now a reasonable thing to discuss?
A really good question. What did you say, it was about 4 cents, 4.5?
4.
So, I think you're asking the right questions, and I think that if you come back and say, we are looking at an option that will allow us to finance this in a way that is, you won't pay much more, and we can have our cake and eat it too. I think that's appropriate. The reason I'm hesitating and the reason why I'm fumbling with my words is I don't know how, are people going to balk completely at the PAC? So I think there still might be a legitimate reason to do your first 2 projects together in one question and then a PAC in a second question. But the way you communicate is that if I were to vote yes on both, we have done our work to try to minimize this tax impact, and we can do it in a way that will only result in a 4-cent increase in the mill rate. Now, I'm using some of those words because I know you know what those mean, but like any kind of financing and 4 cents on a mill rate is my eyes are glazing over. I talk about them and nobody's going to latch on to that. And I'm not saying to do that way, but I think saying that if I were to vote yes on both of these, the impact is going to be fairly minimal for me. I think is the right communication to make. Because it does allow you to tackle a lot of these without, with being pretty close to what was on the bottom here. At the same time, you did have, a third of people that said no to anything. So now even though we're going up a little bit, I am a little worried that that 34% is going to go up a little bit as well. Again, I don't know if that's a very satisfying answer, but at least that's what went through my mind as I was hearing your thought.
And it's kind of traditionally said that if someone's a no, you're probably not going to change their mind, right?
I'm sorry?
In past, with somebody who responds to a survey with no, more than likely, no matter how much you get out in the community and what you do, you're not going to necessarily change that no.
I would say overall that's true.
Okay.
Yeah, the undecideds might split up a little bit, but the people that say no now pretty much going to be in that camp, and that number, yeah, at the end of the day, that number will go up a little bit because if you're undecided, it will still be that way.
Yep.
As I've been studying up on our company and looking at past surveys, it seems as though those undecideds, the best you're going to do is probably get 1/3 of those undecideds, and about 2/3 of those undecideds will tip and join the no's. So very few no's change, and about 1/3 of the undecideds come to the yes side. So,
it's very easy for us to talk because we don't have to do the financial work that PMA needs to do. But if this is discussed as a $12 million no tax impact or a very, very, very slight tax impact, or yes to both questions, which is a tax impact of $4, that might be a logical thing for voters to hear and understand. I guess to the point that I heard before, you're right that people are going to think about that this number in the second row more so than the left first row.
So Dave, what you were talking about with the 4 cents in the mill rate, what would that be per year in that bottom box?
It would be 4 cents per thousand, so you just multiply by 100 per 100,000. $4 a hundred.
$4 per year. We can structure the debt at 25.5 million to have a cost of $4 per year per 100,000.
Yep. And the biggest change is that instead of having two borrows over 2 years, we would sell immediately in December. We have 3 years, so that would reduce each sale so that it would be bank qualified, which essentially just means there's more tax advantage for the underwriter, for the buyer. So it's more desirable, so you get a little better interest rate.
And that's with our 15.6%. And that's projected for next year for our balance. I can't remember what the fund number is. With the deficit spending, we're reducing from 20.6% or 20-point-some% to 15.6%.
But, so these are, yeah, they're separate. They're not, they don't interact with each other at all. The front-end operational side does not interact with the bond sales side, the referendum side.
But the lower your percent is, that can have an impact on your bond rates.
Yeah, yeah.
So these bond rates that you got are with our current 22-23 budget.
Well, I'm guessing we would have another bond rating call before we sell. But we were stable in the factors that we had previously in 2019 with S&P needed to improve. We have seen many of those, so I don't know that necessarily we'd be have a downgrade. But regardless, the whole financing plan from PMA has a lot of conservative variables in it. We started with and still maintain an estimate of 5% property value increase for this year. And we can see already, I think we're around 13 or so for the village and the town. We'll know more the 15th this month, but we're double digits. So that's a conservative scenario. And so I think we can feel comfortable moving forward with that as reasonable estimates.
Any other questions for Rob, Darren, anyone here?
I just had one for Vaughn. So hypothetically, if we ended up in a scenario where we needed to, and I'll use their term, sharpen the pencil, is that something where like you would bring scenarios next week to the meeting? I mean, how?
I certainly could. I'll say we're not selling a product here. When we run our estimates, it's based on scope as defined, square foot, and expectations. So it's not like we say, here's a performing arts center, and you say, well, we don't want to spend that much. Can we buy it from you for X amount less? And we go, oh, okay, well, let's make a deal. So it really does has to come down to scope and talking about that. Just not knowing anything about what was included in the Performing Arts Center that Darren referenced, he said they went from 11.9 million to 9.9 million, and that was a 2017 referendum.
Yes.
So that was 5 years ago. If you just inflate that out at 5%, that's what I was running numbers on, that's 12.6 million. So with the added inflation that we put in there, you can see where the 13.5 million for what he's talking about already is sharpened up Performing Arts Center. It's not that far out of alignment with that for what we're looking at. So the discussions would have to be, we can say, we could look at a few of these things and still deliver this from a Performing Arts Center. We probably would also want to take a look at what's in the major building systems at the elementary. And do you do each of those things? Do you look at, what if we took one of those projects and said, we're going to deal with that 3 years from now or 5 years from now? Also want to look at the stadium and see if you can't tighten up the scope adjustments on each of those. But it does come with the expectation of, that's part of the message, is we are delivering a conservative approach for how we're looking at these things. And if it was successful, you have to keep reminding your stakeholders and your users, we're doing a very conservative approach so that it isn't, oh great, now that it passed, we get everything that we want. You do have to adjust those expectations as you go. So that's my only caveat to that statement.
You'll be here next week?
Yes, absolutely.
With a sharpened pencil.
With a very sharp pencil, delineated.
One of the comments I've gotten from community members has to do with the bleachers and why they need to be replaced. When they were installed, that was a community project. The labor was provided by the community, and a lot of people who were involved in that they don't understand why those bleachers can't still be used, especially when you look at their capacity and the percentage of them that are filled at events.
That certainly would be a line item I would have for discussion.
I believe that was even brought up at one of the committee meetings, and it was kind of brought up with that exact, like people saying, hey, is there some way that we can save some of those pieces? And I think the bleachers were brought up on that.
Yeah,
It was on that.
Another one was the concession stand.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we've had so many.
And that was
other
discussed as well, like, okay, if we needed to look at some of those pieces.
So I think you'd look at all three of those projects and say, where do we take a look at how to be a little bit more conservative with those? And I believe Margaret Johnson will be here as well next week.
Okay, any other questions before we move forward?
What are you thinking, Ian?
I'm thinking all kinds of things.
Do you care to share any of them?
No, I don't know how productive it is. I'm just curious why wouldn't a question be the 25.5 with the tax impact and versus bumping it up another? I mean, you're right in the middle with that, between the 22 and the 29. I don't know. That was my only question. And can we put that message out there when we actually know what that tax impact is? Is it gonna help at this point? Like I said, I didn't know how helpful it was gonna be, but that's what's on my mind.
I think messaging will be really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, Rob and Darren, thank you for sharing all that information.
Of course, and if anything comes up for you, think of a question in 1 minute if we hang up, let us know. Shannon knows how to get a hold of us. We'd be happy to help in any way we could over the next couple of weeks.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, well, moving on, we have a lot of information that we can go over again next week. So, next on our agenda, we have our topics for action. There is the personnel update. All of those are linked
See you
as
next week.
well. Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. For the athletics activities personnel update and the other personnel update, is there a motion, since it is a topic of action, to approve those?
I'll make a motion to approve number 12, agenda A, 1 and 2.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion with those?
Just to say how happy I am that we have a lunch recess supervisor and we also have a new Phi Ed teacher. That's wonderful. Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, once around the table, let's see, who started last time? Marge, you can start this week.
I don't have anything.
Okay? Lori?
I'd like to see the administrative guidelines for policy 8453 that we discussed last month. And we are a month into our new superintendent, and I think it's important that we set goals for the 22-23 school year. And I was wondering if that was something that could be done at our meeting next week, or if the plan was to wait until the end of August.
Ian?
Can we get that information for next week about the 25.5 tax impact, and Dave, look at what's really gonna be?
Matt?
The only thing would be, Shannon, you probably can't answer this, but do you have any idea when teacher-student assignments are going out? elementary, middle?
I don't know.
From all the people that have asked.
Oh, I don't know, but I.
It's a hot topic for little kids, you know?
The elementary teacher assignments are typically sent out at the end of
Not
the
even.
previous.
That stopped after,
Couple years
well,
ago.
COVID, I think. They used to do that, and then,
Years ago.
yeah, so it's changed.
Huh.
I would maybe just email Pam. I'm not sure.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anybody listening,
Yeah.
they know I asked the question.
Yes.
That's all, yeah.
I have nothing tonight. There's a lot of information in my head right now. And we don't have booths. So, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn at 8:14 PM.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion around that? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned at